My parents chose my brother's award over visiting me after a car crash. About 2 weeks ago, I, a 32-year-old woman, experienced one of the most harrowing events of my life, a near-fatal car accident. It happened on what I thought would be a routine drive home after work. Out of nowhere, another car struck mine from the side, sending my vehicle into a terrifying roll before it finally came to rest, battered and upside down. The chaos of those moments was matched only by the deafening silence that followed. When the paramedics arrived, they told me I was incredibly lucky to be alive. But lucky didn't feel like the right word as I was rushed into emergency surgery for internal bleeding, 2 cracked ribs, and a severely injured leg. The days that followed in the hospital were some of the loneliest and most difficult of my life. I stayed there for a week, enduring physical pain and emotional confusion as I tried to process what had happened. I kept thinking about my parents. Surely, I thought, as soon as they heard about the accident, they would drop everything and rush to my side. It's the kind of thing any parent would do, right? But instead of finding comfort in their presence, I found myself waiting, alone and confused. I stared at the door, hoping they'd walk through at any moment, or at least call to check on me. Instead, I waited 4 long days before I even received a text. The hospital staff, who had contacted my parents multiple times because they're my emergency contacts, informed me they'd spoken with them the day after I was admitted. According to the nurses, my parents seemed shockingly unconcerned. I tried to rationalize their behavior. Maybe they were overwhelmed, maybe something unexpected came up, but deep down, it hurt. I texted them every day, clinging to my phone as my lifeline, hoping they'd respond. They didn't. Each unanswered message chipped away at the hope I tried so hard to hold on to. In those lonely days, I was fortunate to have friends who lived far away, but cared deeply. They coordinated with family acquaintances who lived closer, and on my 6th day in the hospital, one of those acquaintances finally visited me. I was so relieved to see someone familiar. But then, in an offhand comment, she shattered whatever illusions I had about my parents' absence. She mentioned how proud they must be of my brother for receiving recognition at an award ceremony. I was stunned. What ceremony? I had no idea what she was talking about. When she realized my confusion, she filled me in. My parents had chosen to attend my brother's award ceremony instead of coming to see me in the hospital. I was speechless. They knew I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery after a life-threatening accident, yet they prioritized celebrating my brother. They spent those days preparing for his event, taking time to get everything perfect for his big moment, while I lay there waiting for even the smallest sign that they cared. Let me be clear, this isn't about jealousy or resentment toward my brother. I understand why my parents are proud of him. He's incredibly talented and has worked hard to achieve his success. He's the golden child, always has been. From the time we were kids, he could do no wrong. Every accomplishment of his was met with admiration and praise, while I was often overlooked. Still, this wasn't about sibling rivalry. This was about my parents' choice to ignore their injured daughter when she needed them most. It's not like I expected them to camp out at the hospital or put their lives on hold indefinitely. All I wanted was for them to show they cared. A phone call, a short visit, something to let me know they were there for me. But instead, they didn't even flinch. They didn't blink an eye at the news of my accident. I could have died that day, and they would have gone on clapping at my brother's ceremony as if nothing had happened. The weight of their indifference crushed me. I felt angry, humiliated, and abandoned. Even after days of reflection, I couldn't come up with an explanation for their actions that made sense. Eventually, I decided I had to say something. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. So, I sent them a message. I told them how hurt I was that they had chosen my brother's award over my well-being. I told them how deeply disappointed I was that they couldn't even make the bare minimum effort to show they cared about me. It was the truth, plain and simple. And honestly, it was long overdue. I expressed my pain to them, making it clear how deeply it hurt that they had not even checked in on me. For the first time since the accident, they responded, but I quickly wished they hadn't. Their words cut deeper than silence ever could. They tried to justify their absence, explaining that they couldn't miss my brother's award ceremony because it was a once-in-a-lifetime accomplishment. I told them that if they had just taken the time to see me earlier, they wouldn't have had to miss the event at all. The truth was, they had made a choice, and that choice wasn't me. After a while, they gave up trying to argue and flat out admitted that coming to see me would have been a waste of time. My brother, they said, was out there making the family proud. That single statement hurt in ways I couldn't put into words. It was a stark confirmation of what I had always suspected. I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. I wish I could say I was shocked by their behavior, but I wasn't. It had been this way my entire life. My brother was the golden child. Every little thing he did was met with applause and celebration. His scholarships, prestigious job offers, and perfect grades were held up as proof of his perfection. Meanwhile, I was the shadow in the background, struggling to be seen. Even when I achieved something noteworthy, it was dismissed as not quite enough. And if I made a mistake, it was a disaster, a failure of epic proportions. I felt like they had made up their minds about me a long time ago, that I was a disappointment, a failure, someone who would never measure up, no matter how hard I tried. That belief followed me like a shadow, and I was constantly left to fend for myself without the support they so readily gave to my brother. A week after my brother's award ceremony, my parents showed up at the hospital. Their arrival was a complete surprise. After our last conversation, I had resigned myself to the idea that I would never hear from them again. When they walked into my room, their faces were painted with fake smiles, and they carried bouquets that felt more like props than genuine tokens of care. They tried to engage in small talk about my recovery, but it was obvious their minds were elsewhere. The effort felt hollow, forced. I couldn't take it anymore and told them to just say whatever was on their minds. Deep down, I already knew that whatever it was, it would upset me, and I was right. My mother broke down into tears as she confessed that my brother had been arrested for fraud at his company. My brother, my parents' pride and joy, had been orchestrating a massive scheme to redirect company funds into his personal investments by falsifying accounts. An internal investigation exposed everything, and when a coworker reported him to management, the police got involved. Now, he was facing serious charges like wire fraud and forgery. My parents admitted they had already drained a significant portion of their savings on lawyers for him, but it wasn't enough. They had come to me, asking for help. They wanted me to use the money I had saved from years of working as a project manager at an IT company to post his bail. As if that wasn't enough, they also wanted me to reach out to any connections I might have to pull strings or find ways to reduce his sentence. I sat there stunned. It was clear that, in their eyes, I wasn't their daughter. I was just a tool to clean up my brother's mess. They hadn't shown any genuine concern for my recovery, yet here they were, expecting me to fix everything. The audacity was overwhelming. I was still battling mental and physical pain, reeling from the aftermath of surgery and the weight of everything I had endured. I couldn't believe that after everything, they had the nerve to ask me for help. When I was lying in that hospital bed, vulnerable and broken, they didn't care. But now that their golden child was in trouble, they were here, begging for my assistance. Part of me felt guilty. Maybe I should have helped for the sake of family, for the sake of preserving some semblance of unity. But the other part of me, the part that had been ignored, dismissed, and undervalued for years, was furious. Why should I save my brother? The same brother who had been handed everything in life on a silver platter, who had never faced real consequences for his actions, was now supposed to be my responsibility? My parents had shielded him from accountability his entire life, and now they expected me to do the same. I refused. I told them that I would not help, not financially, not through my connections, and not in any other way. I made it clear that even if I had the money to spare, I wouldn't feel obligated to use it for him. I reminded them of their neglect, of how they hadn't even bothered to visit me until they needed something. Their priorities had always been crystal clear, and I was tired of being treated like a second-class member of my own family. For once in my life, I felt like I had control over the situation. It was a foreign feeling, but it was empowering. I was finally standing up for myself, refusing to bend to their will, and I was not about to let that go. As I lay in my hospital bed, a swirl of emotions consumed me: anger, frustration, and maybe a hint of remorse. It had only been a week since the accident, and I was still recovering. My leg was in a cast, my ribs ached with every breath, and my body felt like it had been through a war. Yet my parents had not spared me a single visit, not one. Since I said no to them, they had gone radio silent, and honestly, I knew they were upset. But here is the thing. I could not bring myself to care anymore. I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. I had spent far too much of my life chasing their approval, wasting years trying to prove that I was worth their love. And now, I was done. Done with the guilt, done with the manipulation, and done with trying to be the perfect child they had never appreciated. The guilt, though, it lingers. It is hard not to feel like the villain in the story when everyone keeps telling you that family comes first. But how do you forgive a lifetime of being pushed aside? How do you ignore the years of neglect and the blatant favoritism? I felt justified in my decision, yet there was this nagging voice in the back of my head whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was the bad guy. Then came the first update. Hello everyone. I want to thank you for the overwhelming support on my initial post. Your comments and messages gave me the strength to stand my ground, and I cannot express how much that means to me. I honestly did not expect to update so soon, but a lot has happened. I was discharged from the hospital a few days ago. It was a relief to leave that sterile, cold environment behind. My body was still in rough shape. I needed crutches for my fractured leg, and my ribs made breathing a painful ordeal. But I was looking forward to some peace and quiet at home. I wanted to escape the chaos and find a moment of serenity. Unfortunately, that hope was shattered the moment I arrived at my apartment. My parents were waiting for me outside my door. I had not told them when I would be released, so they must have called the hospital to get the details. The audacity of that alone left me stunned. Before I could even get my keys out of my bag, they descended on me like a storm. Their anger was palpable. They accused me of going too far by refusing to help my brother, as though I had committed some unforgivable sin. They were more upset with me for saying no than they were with my brother for the actual mess he had created. They began their usual tirade about how family should always come first, how I was selfish and vindictive, and how I was letting resentment toward my brother dictate my actions. They did not care that I was still recovering from a near-death experience. To them, I was just an obstacle standing in the way of their golden child's rescue. They even had the nerve to tell me that this was my chance to prove myself, to show that I was not a disappointment. Helping him, they said, was the only way I could truly be part of the family. It was absurd. Their words cut deep, but the more they spoke, the more resolute I became. They had made it clear, once again, that I was never enough for them. And now they expected me to sacrifice myself, both literally and figuratively, for someone who had caused so much pain? No, not this time. When I told them I would not help, my mother broke down right there at my door. She sobbed and screamed, saying things like, "We have already lost one child, and now we are going to lose two. You are punishing us for loving him more." My father, on the other hand, was furious. He accused me of being cold-hearted and self-centered, insisting that I would regret my actions once they were gone. It took every ounce of restraint I had not to scream back at them. Despite my exhaustion and pain, I stood firm. I told them that if they did not leave, I would call the police. I made it clear that I would not pay a dime for my brother's bail or legal fees. Eventually, they backed off, but not without hurling a few more insults my way. A few days later, my brother's case made headlines. It seems that the deception was far more elaborate and extensive than any of us had initially suspected. The police uncovered evidence suggesting that my brother had been transferring business funds illicitly for well over a year. To make matters worse, a significant portion of these funds had been funneled through fictitious business accounts registered under his name. As part of a broader investigation, the authorities also discovered that he had not acted alone. Apparently, he had been helping several of his colleagues conceal their embezzled money as well, creating a network of fraud and deceit that now threatens to ruin not just his life, but also the lives of everyone connected to him. As it stands, my brother is facing multiple charges, including conspiracy, money laundering, and fraud. If convicted, he could spend a substantial portion of his life behind bars. It is a sobering thought, one that has cast a long shadow over my family. The fallout from his actions has been nothing short of devastating. My parents, who had always taken immense pride in parading his so-called achievements before anyone who would listen, are now caught in a whirlwind of shame and panic. Their once polished image of having the perfect family has been shattered, and the people they once flaunted it to are now watching closely, some perhaps even reveling in their downfall. In an attempt to control the narrative, my parents have been trying to convince anyone who will hear them out that this is all just a misunderstanding, a temporary hiccup that will be resolved soon enough. But no one is buying it. Word spread like wildfire that their golden child was implicated in a high-profile fraud case. The backlash has been swift and unforgiving. My father even lost a major client when news of my brother's arrest reached them. My parents are floundering, scrambling to salvage what little remains of their reputation. It is painfully clear that they have no idea how to navigate this disaster. And, as expected, they turned to me. This time, however, there was no pretense of dignity or composure. They were desperate, more desperate than I had ever seen them before. They begged for my help, insisting that I step in just this once to ease the pressure they were under. They painted a picture of a family on the brink of collapse, emphasizing how critical it was for me to assist my brother. "If we can just fix this mess," they said, "we can keep the family together." But I knew exactly what they meant by that. Fixing the mess was code for sweeping my brother's crimes under the rug, and keeping the family together was nothing more than preserving the illusion that their golden boy was infallible. When I refused, for the second time, their desperation turned to cold silence. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as though I had ceased to exist in their world. I can only assume that they see me as a traitor now, someone who abandoned the family when they needed her most. And yet, despite the sting of their rejection, I feel an unfamiliar sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I chose to prioritize myself, to stand firm against the tide of manipulation and guilt they have wielded against me for years. It hurts, of course, realizing that my parents never truly saw me as an equal, that they only valued me as a backup plan for when their perfect child stumbled, is a bitter pill to swallow. But it also feels incredibly empowering to finally say no, to refuse to clean up their mess, to refuse to let them guilt-trip me into fixing a situation they enabled. This is their burden to bear now, and I will not carry it for them. Second update. I know many of you have been asking for an update, so here it is. Things have taken yet another unexpected turn, and frankly, it has left me reeling. My brother, who is currently in jail and without access to a phone, somehow convinced one of his friends, a loyal supporter who still insists on his innocence, to reach out to me on his behalf. At first, I was inclined to delete the email without reading it. I assumed it was just another attempt to manipulate me into helping him. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The email was a mixture of confessions and accusations. My brother admitted that he had been involved in the fraud at his company but claimed he was not the mastermind. According to him, he had been used as a scapegoat by higher-ups who orchestrated the entire scheme and are now walking free while he takes the fall. He pleaded with me to help him, not for our parents' sake, but because he believed I was the only one who could prevent our family from completely falling apart. That line, that appeal to save the family, struck a nerve. It mirrored the rhetoric my parents had used, and I could not help but feel skeptical. Was this a genuine plea for help? Or was it just another calculated attempt to exploit my sense of responsibility? What surprised me most, however, was his acknowledgement of our parents' toxic behavior. He admitted that they had always mistreated me, using him as a tool to bolster their egos while I was sidelined. Hearing him say that was strange, almost surreal. He had always played along with their narrative, and now, for the first time, he was admitting the truth. Even so, I could not shake the feeling that his words were crafted to manipulate me. His email was riddled with phrases designed to tug at my heartstrings, to make me question my resolve. I want to believe there is some truth to what he is saying, but at the same time, I cannot ignore the years of hurt and betrayal that have led me to this point. For now, I remain firm in my decision. This is not my mess to clean up, and I refuse to be dragged back into their chaos. Could it be that he was actually being set up? What if I had completely misunderstood the situation and blown it out of proportion? These questions swirled in my mind, making it impossible to let go of the nagging doubt. Part of me desperately wanted to be certain, to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. After wrestling with these thoughts, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I confided in a trusted friend, someone who happened to be a lawyer. They were not directly involved in the case, so they could not provide me with a full legal breakdown. However, their insights proved invaluable. They pointed me in the right direction, offering guidance on where to look for additional information and how to approach the situation more objectively. I followed their advice and started digging deeper. What I found was both shocking and strangely validating. My brother's story wasn't entirely untrue, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Yes, he was undoubtedly involved in fraudulent activities. There was no way to sugarcoat that. He had committed a crime, and there was no escaping that fact. However, as I pieced together the puzzle, it became increasingly clear that he was not the mastermind behind the scheme. He wasn't acting alone, far from it. What emerged was a picture of a larger, more sinister operation. High-level executives, who had been embezzling corporate funds for years, had orchestrated the whole thing. My brother, in his role managing specific accounts, became their scapegoat when the scheme began to unravel. These executives had meticulously insulated themselves, leaving him to bear the full brunt of the fallout. They used him as a pawn, taking advantage of his ambition and naivety. Learning all of this left me deeply conflicted. On one hand, I was angry and disappointed. My brother had willingly participated in illegal activities, knowing full well what he was doing. He wasn't an innocent bystander who stumbled into this by accident. He made a conscious choice, likely convinced that he would never get caught. His actions were reckless, and he had to face the consequences. Yet, at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Knowing that he was manipulated by those more powerful and cunning than him was difficult to stomach. These executives, with their experience and expertise in covering their tracks, had made sure my brother would take the fall. It was calculated, ruthless, and deeply unfair. I couldn't stop thinking about how things might have turned out differently if our upbringing had been different. Growing up in a household that glorified shortcuts and success at all costs had clearly shaped my brother's mindset. He was raised to believe that appearances mattered more than integrity, and that mindset, combined with my parents' constant adulation and protection, likely made him feel untouchable. When I shared my findings with my parents, their reaction was both predictable and infuriating. They refused to acknowledge any responsibility or admit that my brother wasn't entirely innocent. Instead, they doubled down on their narrative, accusing me of being selfish and unfeeling for not putting the family first. Talking to them was like hitting a brick wall. Their refusal to face reality was exhausting, and it became clear that I couldn't change their minds. So, I made the decision to cut ties with them, at least for now. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My brother made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. My parents can continue supporting him if they want, but I won't sacrifice my own well-being to clean up his mess. If the roles were reversed, I know he wouldn't do the same for me. For the first time in a long while, I feel at peace. My decision may not sit well with my family, but I know it was the right one. I've spent too much of my life feeling like I didn't matter, and I'm done with it. My brother's situation is unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility to fix. And then came the fallout. My parents, realizing that their guilt trips and accusations weren't working, decided to escalate their efforts. They reached out to extended family, uncles, aunts, cousins, painting me as selfish, cold-hearted, and ungrateful for not helping my brother. The whispers started spreading, and suddenly, I was the villain in a story I never asked to be a part of. It's been more than a month since I last updated, and I've gathered enough to share with you all. To those who supported me, thank you. It hasn't been easy, but knowing I'm not alone has been a tremendous comfort. When my parents began spreading rumors about me, I was initially oblivious to the damage they were causing. They portrayed me as a bitter and spiteful person, someone who selfishly refused to assist my family despite sitting on a fortune. They painted a picture of me as a heartless monster, someone untrustworthy and unworthy of support. I only became aware of the full extent of their slander when one of my cousins reached out. She told me that my parents had been twisting the story, leaving out critical details about how they abandoned me in the hospital and hadn't contacted me since. They flipped the narrative entirely, making it seem like my decision not to help was rooted in some deep-seated grudge rather than their own history of neglect. I was hurt, deeply. At first, I struggled to comprehend why they would go to such lengths to vilify me. Even after standing up for myself, it felt like I was being punished all over again. I believed I would end up isolated, abandoned by everyone who once mattered to me. But then something unexpected happened. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out, not to support my parents, but to support me. It turned out that my parents' behavior had alienated many relatives over the years. Their relentless focus on my brother, their attempts to protect him at any cost, and their dismissive attitude toward anyone who questioned them had soured relationships across the family. As these relatives began to share their stories with me, I realized just how deep this pattern ran. One of my aunts revealed that my brother had borrowed a substantial sum of money from her husband for a business venture. Predictably, the venture failed, and when my aunt tried to recover the money, my parents cut ties with her entirely. To add insult to injury, they spread rumors that she was greedy and unwilling to support her family. Another cousin shared how, during a family gathering a few years ago, my brother had blamed a parking lot attendant for a car accident involving my uncle. When my uncle tried to address the situation, my parents accused him of attempting to tarnish my brother's reputation and ostracized him from family events. The more I listened, the clearer it became. My parents had spent years covering up my brother's mistakes and silencing anyone who dared to hold him accountable. One relative even recounted how a business partnership between my brother and another family member was sabotaged because my parents believed the relative wasn't prestigious enough to be associated with their son. These revelations were both shocking and, in an odd way, comforting. They validated my experiences and made me realize that I wasn't the problem. My parents' behavior wasn't about me. It never was. Their entire world revolved around shielding my brother, no matter the cost. For years, I carried the burden of believing that I wasn't good enough, that I had somehow failed to meet their expectations. But now, I see the truth. My parents were willing to sever ties with anyone who didn't fit into their narrative, including me. Their desperation for my help stemmed from their awareness of the life I had built, despite their lack of support. As a project manager at a respected IT company, I've built financial stability through careful planning and smart investments. My success, in their eyes, made me a convenient target. When I refused to bail my brother out of jail, my parents scrambled to gather the money through loans and favors. Eventually, they managed to secure his release, but the legal proceedings were far from over. Recently, I learned that my brother decided to cooperate with the authorities, providing information about higher-ups involved in the scheme. His cooperation earned him a lighter sentence, 1 year in jail followed by community service. While I acknowledge the value of his decision to cooperate, it doesn't erase the fact that he chose to engage in the scam in the first place. And truthfully, I don't believe this experience will change him. He has always relied on our parents to clean up his messes, and I doubt that will stop anytime soon. As for me, I've made a decision that I should have made long ago. I have permanently cut off contact with my parents. They are blocked on all my social media accounts, and I've instructed the front desk at my building to deny them entry if they show up unannounced. I refuse to be their scapegoat, fallback plan, or emotional punching bag any longer. Surprisingly, I feel at peace with this decision. Letting go of my family hasn't left me feeling empty. It has been liberating. For the first time in years, I can live my life without the constant comparison to my brother, or the futile search for affection from people who were never willing to give it. The silver lining in all of this has been the unexpected support from extended family. Relatives I barely knew have stepped forward to offer encouragement and share their own experiences with my parents. One of my aunts even apologized for not recognizing the situation sooner. She admitted that while she had always sensed something was off about the way my parents treated me, she avoided confronting it to keep the peace. Now, she has become one of my strongest allies, along with several other family members who have welcomed me into their lives with open arms. For the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I have found a sense of belonging in a family I never knew I had. These relatives have invited me to gatherings and events where my parents won't be present, and I'm looking forward to building these new connections. It feels strange, yet wonderful, to realize that after years of exclusion, I've finally found a family that values and supports me. Thank you to everyone who has offered advice and encouragement throughout this journey. Your words helped me realize that standing up for myself wasn't wrong. It was necessary. While the road hasn't been easy, I can confidently say that I am finally in control of my life.